Shabbat Shalom. We got a lot to talk about. It's been one of those weeks. And as we continue to pray for the health and success of both Israel and the United States in the current conflict, we also have to look close to home. Because while we are not the target of the missiles and drones coming out of Iran, the way the people of Israel and the armed forces around the Middle East are, we are still going to catch flies, as they say. We are going to be hit by a few stray shots. Most importantly, the incredibly massive surge in anti-Semitism that we have seen over the last week. I mentioned one of the most outstanding, if that's the right term, hits of anti-Semitism that came just yesterday as a prominent pundit has decided that this war was caused by Chabad. We discussed that a little bit last night, the underlying presumption being that Chabad is somehow orchestrating this in order to cause a war that will allow them to rebuild the third temple. And as I mentioned last night, I have a lot that I disagree with Chabad on, and I'm happy to discuss that in excruciating detail, but they did not cause this war. And to call this the cause is one of the most obvious forms of anti-Semitism imaginable. But there have been a lot of other slightly more subtle versions of anti-Semitism that have been trotted out over the last week of conflict as well. So let's make sure that we can recognize it when we see it, and let's make sure we can understand why not only is it anti-Semitic, but that it is false. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit about why it is that at this particular juncture, anti-Semitism seems to be the flavor of the week for people across the entire political spectrum. Fair warning, whatever we talk about today, I think you'll find equally true among whichever cherished political party you may happen to adhere to. There are members across the spectrum and beyond its edges that all seem to agree that it's Israel's fault. And when they say Israel, really, when we look at this, they mean the Jews. So let's take an example of that basic idea. Israel forced the U.S. to do this. This was, in fact, stated by a Secretary of State who later walked it back and tried to clarify, but that this was somehow precipitated by the Jews by Israel's decision. Do we honestly believe that the United States of America, the most powerful military in the world, by an order of magnitude beyond its closest rival, was forced to do what tiny Israel wanted it to do? Do we think that that is really how geopolitics works, how the military works, that Israel is somehow able, because of what she had planned to do, apparently, and although none of this has been confirmed, but at least now suspected and now grist for the rumor mill, that Israel was planning an additional strike to continue on with her strikes that she had made last year in the 12-day war against Iran, and that the United States went, oh no, Israel can't do that, because if they do that, we'll be attacked, so we better attack first, because certainly the United States has no leverage whatsoever to force Israel not to act. What? The basic partnership between the United States and Israel is fundamentally misunderstood. Let's just make sure we are clear on this. How many people live in the United States?
330 million.
Oh, you haven't updated, and we're closer to almost up to 400 million now. 350, 375, depends on how you're counting, which is a whole nother conversation. And how many people in Israel?
10 million.
Yeah. 10 to 15 million, again, depending upon how you're counting her borders and the people inside of it. Who has the larger economy? Is this a question? The United States, people, right? Who has the largest military? The United States. Very good. Who has the most billionaires? The United States. All right, so we're beginning to see that this is not exactly a likely scenario, that Israel, with its smaller economy, smaller number of powerful, wealthy people, smaller military, smaller population, was able to dictate policy to the United States of America. And the United States of America, which annually gives Israel a small amount of money, really, compared to our budget, it is trivial, and that meant that we were somehow having to do what Israel wanted. It's a problem. Now, what is the underlying anti-Semitic trope behind here? The court Jew. The court Jew. This goes back into the Middle Ages and Renaissance and early modern period. Oftentimes, there would be a particularly important person within one of the European courts, or within each European court, who was Jewish. And they were often the liaison to the Jewish world, and they were also often somebody that was able to marshal the economic resources of the Jews of that time, often at the demand of the local royalty. Not because we had so much, but because if you can squeeze us all at once, the local king found that quite usable. Well, now, if you have somebody in the court who is from this small group, us, and they seem to have disproportionate power because the king is using them in order to fund what they cannot otherwise legitimately get their own citizenry, parliament, or other nobles to support, then when there are problems, who do you blame? You blame the court Jew for making this possible. You blame the court Jew for clearly encouraging the king in whatever excesses of violence or debauchery the king is indulging in, because it must have been the court Jew that set the king up for this for the nefarious purposes of the Jews as well. Now, eventually this idea metastasizes into what is known as the Protocols of the Elder of Zion. This was a Tsarist book that was written in order to promote more anti-Semitism, and it is still considered to be gospel by many anti-Semites to this day. Many people still haven't gotten the memo that 100 years ago this was a fictional book written for this very purpose. And so I really believe the Tsar got his money's worth when he got this printed. Because in it, it establishes that, yes, the Jews are in fact setting up these wars and other problems for the world, because that's what Jews do. We have a secret network of Jews all over the world that are able to pull strings in all of these courts, now governments, and we have orchestrated all of the great catastrophes and problems of the world. Notice they don't give us credit for any of the good stuff that's happened, but apparently that was when we must have been asleep. Because the idea goes that the Jews want non-Jews to continue to fight and hurt and kill each other because that's how we will thrive and do best. Again, failing to notice the historical truth that when there is large-scale war, famine, or other problems, we usually get it in the neck harder than other groups rather than less. But when did truth ever get in the way of anti-Semitism? So, is Israel forcing the U.S. to do anything? No. It's okay. It wasn't that Israel forced the U.S. to do anything, says the anti-Semite, recovering from this first admission. It was that the U.S. bribed the government, the politicians, to do something. It's that AIPAC money that does everything. It's that AIPAC money. All right. Is AIPAC the largest lobbying group in the United States? No, not by a long shot. Is lobbying a protected First Amendment activity within the United States? Yes. Yes, it is. Is AIPAC an arm of the Israeli government and its policies? No. No, it isn't. Does AIPAC support good cooperation between the United States and Israel? Yes. The same way that numerous other lobby groups will support good relations between the U.S. and other countries, and the U.S. and other industries, and the U.S. and whichever happens to be their own particular focus. That's what lobbying is. Does AIPAC give money to support candidates that it believes will be favorable to its vision of a good relationship between the United States and Israel? Of course it does. Does Google give money to candidates they think will be good at fostering the vision of the relationship between the United States and Google? A whole lot more money than AIPAC ever gives. If you believe that AIPAC, tiny little AIPAC, was able to bribe enough officials within the U.S. government to precipitate a war that is not in the U.S.'s interests, you are seriously undervaluing how much it would take to bribe a government official. Because there's competitors out there. After all, Google doesn't necessarily want there to be a war that's going to disrupt the economic flow. So if Google's going to bribe you $100 million not to have the war, do you think AIPAC is going to be able to come up with the cash to counteroffer? Absolutely not. Quite frankly, we don't have enough money to bribe the politicians to do what we want because we can't compete in the real market of corruption. I know, it's sad. I hate to talk down about our Jewish community, but we don't have the cash to be able to bribe on the level that you need to bribe in order to start a war. And that means that unless our politicians decided to start a war for $10,000, they probably didn't do it because of that sweet, sweet AIPAC money. They must have had some other reasons. Well, the other reasons, of course, are because they are trying to protect Israel. Next stage in our anti-Semitic screed. It is because the United States is trying to protect Israel. The United States has seen what the Iranian proxies of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, as well as others, have been doing against Israel for decades. They have seen the missiles that Iran has been developing and attacking with, and of course the nuclear program that Iran has dedicated to the eradication of Israel, and the US has decided to step in to save Israel. Yeah, that's called being an ally. When the US stepped in to save England or France or any of the other European countries from Nazis, did we say that England was owning the US, controlling the US, that it was our nefarious British cousins that were manipulating America to fight her war for us? Well, there were a few people, we called them American Nazis, who did have that argument, but by and large, most of the people said, no, what England is currently going through, as well as the rest of Europe, deserves to be stopped. And if we don't stop it there, it's not going to stop there, and will continue to spread and dominate more and more of the world and cause more and more chaos, which also happens to, not surprisingly, be a problem for us eventually. So better to stop it now than allow it to continue to grow. That's how alliances work. That's how friendship among nations work. When there is a mutual threat, even if it is a greater threat to one party than the other, you come together to tackle that threat before the threat either harms your friend or continues to grow in greater danger to your friend and others. When the rest of NATO came to America's defense after 9/11 and joined in the assault against the Taliban in Afghanistan, that was what NATO was for. No one should be surprised that there was a mutual agreement on a mutual goal against a mutual threat. If America did feel that Israel was threatened, we should not be surprised if America acted to protect Israel, as America has made it clear throughout the decades that Israel's strength, Israel's defense is in American interests, that it helps America be stronger, it helps America be safer, and it helps America be richer. So America is not being suckered into this deal of helping Israel. America is serving its own interests as well as its ally. Again, that's what an ally is. Any other things you've heard about how Israel is behind all of this?
There's this guy named Ryan Maddow on Instagram and he's like got a whole bunch of followers. He's like kosher.
We don't need to pump him up, but what's his theory?
That he's anti-Semitic. He's saying that Hitler's a good guy.
No, but what's his theory about the war? Anti-Semites are a dime a dozen. I need people targeted on this topic.
His theory with the war is that Trump and Netanyahu got together to bomb Iran because they said that they're trying to cover up the Jeffrey Epstein.
Thank you. There we go. That was the one I was looking for. Okay, so to make sure everybody is following that line, America went to war because Israel was trying to blackmail our president and other members of our government with regards to the Jeffrey Epstein files, because Jeffrey Epstein was actually a secret agent of the Mossad. Okay, everybody got all that? All right. Okay, now, look, I'm not going to say that our government doesn't sometimes do things to distract from one thing to the next. That happens, absolutely. Would this be the right thing to do in order to give a distraction? Probably not. Because let's look at what the alternative would be. Right? This is based off a premise of blackmail. Right? That Israel or Mossad or somebody was, probably Jewish, because after all, Jeffrey Epstein was Jewish, therefore we're all in it together. So they had information that would be embarrassing or devastating to the government. Well, what would that information be? That there was a pedophilia ring? We know that. That numerous people who in positions of power across party lines were involved with Epstein, give or take what their involvement was in his other activities. We know that. This is not new. So where exactly is the power of the blackmail coming? That they're going to give true proof? And what will that do? We have such a divided polity and political discourse that I do not believe that even if the most egregious rumors were ever proved true, that it would shift the political needle in this country more than 2 degrees. Because people have already decided, they have already been exposed to this topic now for years, where they believe their own people and the people they support are and the people they hate are, and whatever comes out further is not going to change the most people's mind. But you say, yes, but it would force prosecutions. By whom? By the federal government? It's going to prosecute itself. It shows no interest in doing that. So why do we believe that there is anything that could have been done that would have been sufficiently severe enough that the government would be willing to go to war to prevent this from happening? And why do we believe that if it was being used in this way, it would not continue to be used in this way for decades to come? When does the expiration date on this supposed war-worthy tragedy finally show up? Or do we expect that the nefarious Jews who have this secret cabal information are going to continue to extort our government for decades to come? Well, some people argue that they don't understand how blackmail works. Right? Honestly, that's just not how blackmail works. Right? You need 2 things to get blackmail. You need the victim to actually have shame, and you need the victim to believe that when they pay, they're not going to continue to pay forever or pay too much beyond the potential damage that that particular revelation might give. I do not see either of those as being relevant in this case, for better or worse. But plus, we are based entirely on an anti-Semitic trope known as the blood libel. Why is it so easy for them to imagine that the Jews were involved in a secret plot to kidnap and harm children? Because they've been claiming that that's what we've been doing since the 1200s. The idea that Jews would kidnap Christian children and use them in our ritualistic rites has been going around for almost 1,000 years within European society. And you know what? It's pernicious, meaning that it doesn't go away. We can be the most model citizens. We can be the most polite members of the community. But scratch the surface in moments of stress, and the blood libel will come out. The elders of Zion will come out. The idea of dual loyalty, that the Jews are more loyal to Israel than we are to the United States, will come out to the surface. Even before there was an Israel, there were accusations of dual loyalty, because we dared to actually say we cared about our brothers and sisters who are Jewish in other parts of the world. Why? Why are we always lurking under the surface of their paranoia, ready to burst forth in these moments of stress? Because we're convenient. Right? One, we're ready-made. We've already been targeted for so long that it's easy. Nobody has to invent any new conspiracies. You just say it's the Jews, and everyone else can fill in the blanks that as far as they need in order to be able to, oh yeah, well, we know what they're like. We are ready-made as an answer, as a scapegoat. We're practically shackled and standing ready next to every crisis, just waiting to be used, because we've been used for so long. But why have we been used so long when others only occasionally get to be the scapegoat? Why do we keep getting used so much? It's quite simple. We're small, we're different, and nobody has an automatic allegiance to us. Understand, that the anti-Semitism I am talking about, and I've spent the last week trawling through social media to make sure I was getting an accurate view of this for this sermon, is found among socialists and fascists. It is found among Democrats and Republicans. It is found among those who are promoting the most free, open societies and those who wish to have the most closed and restricted societies. Because none of them see us as essential to their plan. We are not part of the vision of any group for their ultimate utopia. We are always expendable because we are small, because we don't have enough power despite them claiming that we are controlling world affairs, because we don't have enough population despite them claiming that apparently we have an outsized influence over all of human history. We are the easy target. We are the convenient target, and by targeting us, none of those other groups are going to fundamentally damage their own coalitions. If you are on the left, if you target the wrong group, well, now your coalition has split. But you target the Jews, well, the Jews are not a protected class. If you are on the right, well, again, there are certain sacred cows that if you try to target, try to advocate against, your coalition will split. But the Jews, ultimately, they are expendable. Both sides will play lip service to supporting Israel and to supporting the Jews. The left will always talk about how they believe in a country and a world that is free from hate. But they will also believe that Israel is a colonial settler state and that the Jews are an ethno-nationalist group that believe themselves superior, which is an anti-Semitic trope that predates the creation of the left wing during the French Revolution. And likewise, the right may currently espouse their allegiance under Christo-nationalist ideas of Armageddon. But let's be honest, their version of Armageddon involves us dying or converting to Christianity. That is not an allegiance to Jews, that is not an allegiance to Israel, that is an allegiance to their own warped interpretation of their scriptures, in which we play the starring role as the sacrifice that brings about their second coming. That is not what I call friendship, and that is not what I call support. So what do? Well, first of all, we stand up and we say this is wrong. How many of you are prepared when you hear somebody say, well, Israel did it. Israel is behind this. Well, it was the Epstein files being used this was being used to hide the Epstein files because that's what Mossad wanted. How many of you be willing to tell somebody at work that they're full of it? How many of you are willing to say, when you hear somebody muttering in the line at the supermarket, you're wrong, and what you've said is hateful? And worse than hateful, what you have said will allow things to perpetuate in this world that not only harm the Jews, but harm everyone else. You see, when we stand up for ourselves, we are not only standing up for ourselves because Jews are special. We are, but that's not the only reason we're standing up for ourselves. But because if we are allowed to be the excuse for the left, for the right, for the capitalists, for the socialists, for everybody, then no one is actually going to be tackling the true problem. If you think that you have the flu, but what you actually have is cancer, then all the orange juice in the world isn't going to make you better. And if you continue to lie to yourself and others about what you think is your real ailment, and you go to great lengths to target it, but then you are blinding yourself to the actual problems. We need to have legitimate conversations about how we went into this war, why we went into this war, and where this war will go. But if we fixate on the idea that the perfidious Jew is somehow behind it, we will never have those real conversations. And we will never be able to truly understand how the war started, how the war should or should not be conducted, and when we could expect the war to finish. We blind ourselves to the real conversations of policy when we allow anti-Semitism to continue, and especially as Jews say, well, there they go again. And we roll our eyes, and we tut our tongues, and we say, that's just so stupid. And we forget to point out to them that not only are they stupid for hating us about something which we did not cause, but they are stupid for turning away from what may be the actual causes and allowing themselves to continue to live in a world that they think is so bewildering that the only solution is a secret society of superpowered Jews that somehow continue to be exploited and harmed at every turn, and yet nevertheless pull the levers of the world's power. That's the solution they come up with, because we have not been able to explain to them properly that by coming up with that solution, they are allowing the actual levers of power to continue to be pulled by people that aren't Jews, by people that aren't anything other than self-interested and following an agenda entirely for themselves. That is the ultimate crime. And people are blinded by the anti-Semitism to see it, and we are blinded by our outrage at the anti-Semitism to explain it. It's hard being a Jew. It is really hard. When people come to convert, one of the first things I talk to them about is the fact that this is hard. Sure, you want to do this. Obviously, those of us who continue to be Jewish and those who join Judaism as well understand that it's worth it. That there is a beauty and a power in Judaism that is not found in the levers of government. It is not found in the halls of Congress, but is found in our own hearts and in our communities like this. But we have to recognize we also have a power that comes from our history to be able to explain, to teach, to guide so many who are currently confused and angry, and rightly so, that the simple solution that they have settled on, that it's Zionists, that it's Jews, is not only wrong, but it is wrong for them. If we don't, it's not going to get better. And I don't know about you, but I'm sick of it. And I'd rather help them figure out what's really going wrong in their life than just roll my eyes at their stupidity one more time. It's hard when they say they hate you to help them understand that their anger is misdirected, and that with a little patience, maybe we can get them to recognize that. And if not, well, at the very least, we have stood up for ourselves, as we have always done, and as we will continue to do until the world is finally redeemed. Shabbat Shalom.